Hi, John. So we'll start out, and I'll go through an introduction to the tool itself, kind of a high level, again, positioning the tool so you understand where it fits in the solution. We'll talk about some of the things that you can do and how certain features within the tool can benefit you in the setup of a new partner or even changes to your existing partner relationships. We will dive into an actual demo and take a look at a few common examples, the types of changes that are often requested that you can make on your own using the tool. And then we'll finish up looking at the pricing and included support, and then open it up to any questions that the audience may have. Looking at the tool itself, many of you have probably viewed a diagram similar to this. And when we look at the overall solution, we often talk about our modular approach to EDI. And everyone on the call today has certainly onboarded a trading partner, and we've loaded the module into Transaction Manager. And really that's what we'd consider the trading partner mapping. We have another module, what we know as the business system mapping, that lives between Transaction Manager and your business system. And that module, up until this tool arrived, was always managed internally, managed in-house. You need to work with our team to go and make changes to the way that customer fields, customer mapping, relate to the fields within your business system. And that's the part that we're really going to focus on today, is how the integration mapping tool allows you to have control over that business system mapping between Transaction Manager and your system. And I should add that we have a wide variety of systems that are in use by the audience today. So your business system, we may be connecting to it directly through an API, through a web service. We may be passing a file of some sort. So the box represented by business system could be a direct connection to your system, or it could really be the file that we are creating. In either case, the business system mapping and subsequently the tool, the integration mapping tool, controls the mapping in the same way. That way it's applicable to everyone who may be in the audience today. When we take a little bit of a deeper dive into what we're really talking about here, what I've done is kind of expanded deeper into the view between Transaction Manager and the business system. And really what we know as the business system plugin, or often referred to as the BSP. Within that, we have the web interface, which is the tool we're going to be looking at. And this is the tool that we use internally as an organization to make those changes. So when you call into our support or integration support, that's the tool that they're using. And that tool controls the format definitions of your imports and exports, the method that we're interfacing to the system, any of the mapping logic that exists, calculations and other manipulations of the data. And we're going to really look at the changes, those types of changes that you can make with the web interface itself. In the tool, again, the integration mapping tool, what we're giving you the ability to do is really map the data from EDI fields into fields within the business system. And the interface that, again, we'll be looking at here live in a few minutes is a drag and drop interface, in that, if you wanted to be able to take a field such as a purchase order number and map that into a field, in your system, maybe called customer PO number, you can quite literally drag from one side over to the other and map that value in. And that's, certainly simplistic level of mapping, but it's about giving you the ability to do that and giving you the control over that, so that you can quickly, especially when bringing on a new partner, make the necessary changes, because as you know, every partner is a little bit different in how the data comes across and how you may want to see that data within your system, and this is giving you that control. Of course, dragging one field and mapping it into a field in the system is one thing, but within that same tool, you then can apply additional logic, so adding conditions, if then else statements and switch statements, being able to perform mathematical functions, adding and subtracting, multiplying, summations, as well as, and we'll be looking at this part in particular in detail, being able to define lookups or cross-references in the data, being able to look at and converting the data. And then of course other types of typical data manipulation items, such as being able to parse the data, perhaps pulling a certain piece of data out based on position or the presence of a character, concatenation of data, so on and so forth. And those are different functions that we'll be diving into in the tool. Again, giving you the ability, because you, the customer, knows best in terms of what you're looking to do, and what data, how you want to see that data. And this way, rather than explaining it to someone, you're able to just go in and see those changes right within the environment. Now, we're going to talk about, really why integration mapping tool, right? Well, first of all, it is accessible by you. On-demand mapping, you log into the tool, you can make a change, you can deploy it, and it's a matter of seconds or a couple of minutes. It's not a phone call. So you don't need to make appointments for integration changes. If you have ever onboarded a new partner and perhaps you have a red field on an outbound transaction and you want to be able to go into that field and just you know what the field is that you want to map into it, but you can't make the change. This gives you the ability to do that. Any change that you make, you can deploy it out to your transaction manager immediately. So there is no waiting. You're in control of that. You can see that happening. Go to transaction manager, refresh, and you'll have that change there. The flexibility to do partner-specific changes. A lot of times I'll get asked a question about a particular partner, and a user will want to map a value in for one partner but doesn't want it to affect their other trading partners. So everything we've done with this tool and the way it's designed for your access, meaning our customers' access, when you make a change, it applies to a specific partner. That way, any change you make, you do not need to worry about it impacting another trading partner. So especially in the context of you have 20 partners in production and you add your 21st partner, any changes you make are particular to that new trading partner, and that'll make more sense when I actually show it to you live in the view here. There is a complete audit trail with rollback functionality. So any change that you make or changes made by others, you have the visibility to that. We have a complete audit trail and a report tool. You can go in, you can see what that change was, what the old value is, what the new value is, who made it, group them by the types of changes. And you can also roll back individual changes. So when you go in and you make a modification to the map, you deploy it to Transaction Manager, and it's not quite what you were expecting or what you wanted, you can go back and roll back just that individual change just with a little rollback button within the tool. So it's very easy to roll back an individual change without having to take back maybe 3 or 4 other changes that you made at the same time. You can undo one at a time. Now you also have a global rollback capability as well, but most users find the individual rollback to be the most useful. The tool also allows you to build your own custom conditional logic. So even though you're mapping at the partner level already, you may find it useful to be able to go in and add a certain condition. So maybe within a given trading partner, perhaps the order type that you want to use in your system is driven by the order type coming in from the customer PO. For example, maybe a customer, maybe they order both shipments going directly to a consumer as well as going to a distribution center or a store. And maybe that changes some parameter within your sales order. So you want to wrap conditional logic around that. So if it's a dropship PO, then I want to do this, else do something else. So that type of logic, even within a partner, is very easy to do with the tool. And again, you can just log in, add that logic, deploy it out. Now, with any tool, there are certain permissions and restrictions that are built into the product. So, what is allowed? Well, we're mainly here talking about changes to the business system mapping, fields that you see in Transaction Manager mapping to fields within your system, or the reverse, fields in your system mapping to fields in Transaction Manager, and most notably getting rid of those red fields, right? I always tell everyone you should not be keying anything into the outbox of Transaction Manager. If there is a red field that's showing up when you pull that transaction from your system, then that data could be mapped into that field. You can map per partner. So all the mapping changes you make, this goes back to what I was saying a moment ago about not having an impact on your other trading partners. So it's always at the individual partner level. You can add your own conditional logic. Again, the if statements, then statements, nested statements. We use switch statements a lot, which is very similar to a case statement. Control of the custom lookup tables and defaults. I'm sure most of you have used a lookup table or at least populated a value in a lookup table. You have the ability to modify the content of those lookup tables, and really create new ones. Be able to go in and we're actually going to build a lookup table or two here in the demo, so we'll dive into that. Now, what is not allowed with your access to the tool? Well, most notably, changes to the EDI segment or elements. In other words, the mapping, the actual X12 mapping is controlled by us as it is today and will be moving forward. And we do that to protect you. That way we are controlling the X12 mapping, making sure that we're always compliant with what the partners ask for, and of course maintaining that at the global level as we do today. You cannot add and remove fields to the actual formats themselves. So if you want to add a new field, you'd still reach out to us. We would add that new field into your mapping. But you can control how the data maps in and out of those fields that are there. Of course, you can't just add a new transaction set to the integration tool. We still need to do that. You would still, as you do today, work through your account manager to add or remove a new integrated transaction. Once it's there, however, then you certainly have the ability to go through and control how the data maps in and out of that format. We're going to walk through 3 examples today, and perhaps if there's time, maybe some others. But the first example, as my trading partner sends a do not deliver after date. But of course, in my system, I just have a ship date, or maybe a required ship date, or something to that effect. And of course, it varies from system to system. But oftentimes, you may want to take a date provided by your partner and map it into your system. So it's not ship date to ship date, but perhaps it's do not deliver after date to ship date. And then maybe you want to add or subtract days to that. And maybe even you want to give your users the ability to control how many days that is, and maybe per partner. So I'm going to show you how you can very easily do that with the tool. Well, secondly, we'll look at a scenario where you want to enter data in your sales order that doesn't come in on the customer PO. So customers send the PO the way they want to see it, but you need, let's say in this example, an internal warehouse code. Well, that warehouse code might be derived by some parameter that comes in on the order, or maybe even just something simply by the item code being ordered, or the ship to state, or even just a particular store or DC determines whether it's out of your East Coast or your West Coast warehouse, or any other warehouses that you have defined. Really, the ship from location is what we're talking about. So again, the ability to map that logic right into the system. And then the third example is being able to go through and add additional values. So your trading partner wants an attribute on an outbound, say, invoice that isn't in your system. So certainly you can go through item translation, but maybe there's other things that you need to create a custom lookup for so that the value is populated. And of course, we'll look at an example of that. Okay. So with that said, let me go ahead and open up the tool here, and we'll go through and look at a few examples. So as I'm bringing up on the screen here, Transaction Manager, and this should look familiar to everyone in the audience. Now, Transaction Manager does come, for those of you that are not aware, it does come in two flavors. There's the web-based, there's the on-premise Transaction Manager. I'm showing this today in the web-based product. Everything I show today does apply to both on-premise and web-based. So if you're on our on-premise product, that's okay. Integration Mapping Tool still launches, basically the same way with either product. So from within Transaction Manager, under the Help menu, there is a link called Integration Mapping Tool. And when we launch it, in my case, that's going to open up a new browser window here and bring me right into the tool itself. If this tool is not licensed, that's going to bring you into a page where you fill out a form to let your account manager know that you have interest in adding that tool to your account. When we log into the tool, immediately to the left here, you will notice the partners that you own. Now, in this case, just a sampling of partners, but you would see the partners specific to your account. And at the very top, this would be what we call your business system plugin. So that would be particular to your individual setup. Now, since we have an audience with a variety of business systems, I've brought in a few different formats here that we'll look at from different types of systems. Everything I show you pretty much is universal across the integration types that we support. But of course, every setup is a little different, so I'm showing you, this really based on some general principles. So I talked about the three examples, so we'll go through those, but just to kind of level set before we dive into those examples, I'll just run through a quick high-level introduction of what we're really looking at, and then we'll dive right into it. So the integration mapping tool will always break it out by partner, the mapping that is. So when we look at a given partner, I'm going to use Amazon as our example, we will still see the import and export definitions that we have. And within our definitions, we'll see the particular formats that you have. Now, in this case, I have an example of Sage, an example of SAP, Dynamics, just a generic CSV file. So whichever interface you have, and that's just 4 of many that we support, you're going to see that listed there. So any export document or any import document that you might have. When we expand a particular format, then we get into what we actually call the mapping, or as it says here, the token mapping. And you will find that when we expand that, we actually see the fields for that particular system. So if it's a file, these would be the columns that make up, the rows and columns that make up your file. Or if it's a system where we're directly interfacing through an API or through, web services or something of the like, these would be the fields that you would probably be familiar with, the fields as they appear within the ERP. Now, everything on the right over here would be what you see in Transaction Manager. And I'm going to point out this view right over here to the right. Note that I am in Amazon right now, and within Amazon, I'm in a particular export format. So over here on the right, when I look at these maps, these are actually the Amazon maps. We talked about the ability to see your customer transactions or your customer maps. So if I look at the Amazon purchase order, the tabs that I see here are exactly the tabs that you would see within Transaction Manager. So for example, if I expand shipping, then we're going to see the exact fields that you would see in Transaction Manager. So you do not need to have expertise in raw data to be able to use tool. If you see the field in Transaction Manager and you look at the name of it in the tab that it's on, you're going to see the same thing here. So shipping tab, and the field is do not deliver after. And that's the first example that we'll work with. So what I'm going to do is say, here's a field in my ERP called ship expiration date. So in this case, I want to map my do not deliver after field into that date. Now, as I mentioned before, it's quite simple. It's a drag and drop interface. I drag that over and I would save it off, and that creates that link. And now that value will map directly into my ERP. Very simple. Perhaps you want to take that a bit further and you want to add or subtract days. We have a very simple function that can be added. So if we take this out, so we'll just leave that blank again, we're going to go over to our tools section, and we have a series of functions that are available as part of the tool. Summation tools and if-then statements, various functions for concatenation of data and truncation, etc. In this case, we're going to use something very simple called date add. Now, so that you don't need to know our syntax, we've built a function builder into the tool. So once I add this date add function, I can just click on my function builder, and you'll see this date add and days to add. So what this really means, this here would be the date that we're talking about. So I will copy in that do not deliver after date. And again, I could go back here and drag it over, or I could just paste it in. And then the days to add or subtract. So we'll just say 5 and confirm that's a valid function, save it off, and we're good to go. Now I can also hand edit this. So, for example, if I wanted to, maybe I wanted to subtract instead of add days, it'd just be a negative value. So I would just pass in -5. In that case, it would subtract 5 days, and that would be the date that we pass in. And I could save it off like so. A lot of the functions are fairly self-explanatory. If you have any comfort level with working with basic functions like so. The function builder makes it simple in that you don't need to worry about comma usage and perfect syntax. That keeps you really in check. Especially with there is you'll notice a checkbox here that will actually validate the function and make sure that it is valid before you save the document. Now, if we wanted to get a little bit fancier with this, we could. We could go and we could say that we want to pass any value from transaction manager. So we want to take user input rather than hard coding subtract 5 days. We could actually have that where a user adds that value to transaction manager. So in that case, and I'll show you in transaction manager first very quickly. If we look at our view for any partner here, in this case we'll look at Amazon, and we'll go into our lookup tables. And you'll see here I have a field called shipping days, and I just added this as a new field, and then there's a value here. So this is where a user now could, by partner, come and say, well, for this customer, we'd like to take off 5 days, or we'd like to take off 2 days, and or we add 2 days. And they can just enter this in as a default, and that's what we'll use instead of hard coding that into the map. The only difference in the tool itself is that rather than put this -5 in here, we simply come over and we have the ability to add our lookups. So here's that shipping days lookup that we were viewing. So I can just drag that in, and now it will use that parameter instead of a hard-coded value. So now we're going to take the do not deliver after date. We're going to read the user input, and then that's the date that we're ultimately going to deliver. In this case, as the date expiration date into Sage. Okay. So one example. The second example we talked about was the ability to do a warehouse code. So most systems would have a field for the warehouse. So here in this case, it's simply called warehouse code. Sometimes it's a site ID. Could be various names, but in general, it's the inventory location where the order is going to be pulled from. And sometimes we want to be able to determine that based on something in the inbound order. So here I have something called warehouse translation. And again, this is a lookup, and I could just drag that in, and that will map that value. But so that you understand how this works, we'll take a bit of a dive into this. If we dive into our what we call lookups, this is where those get defined. So if I wanted to create a new lookup, let's just say it was based on distribution center, we could add and create our new lookup, and we'll just call this our warehouse code lookup. And we want the result, we want to be our warehouse code. And the parameter that we want to pass in from the customer PO is our distribution center number. And we want to be able to do this for each partner. And then again, I am in Amazon right now. I'm in my Amazon purchase order. So now I can come over here and I could pick my DC field, add that in as the parameter, and save that. And what that says is I'm going to take the distribution center number, I'm going to pass it into my table, and I'm going to then look up the value that you've entered in that table, and then that's what we're going to pass into the system. So when I save that off, and if we actually deploy this to Transaction Manager, so I'll come in, I will deploy it. That's creating a new version. It's sending it to Transaction Manager. We'll come in, we'll log out of the tool. And now if we come in and refresh our view here, you'll see that that new lookup is here. So here's warehouse code lookup that we just created, and now this is where we would put our if it's DC1234, then we want to use this code, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with filling out the lookup table, but that is actually how you create a new lookup table. You can do it, as you see, in a couple of minutes on your own. Very straightforward. Certainly can speed up the process when you go to add a new trading partner. You want to create a new lookup. Or for those of you that might be partners on the call, the ability to come in here and perform that on behalf of your customers. We'll look at one last quick example here. I'm sure that you, in general, see the type of power that you have with the tool. So we'll just quickly log back into the integration mapping tool. Again, I just logged in right from Transaction Manager. And I have our module. So we'll come in here. We're going to look at an outbound invoice for Kroger. So we come in here. We look at our import definitions this time. And this time we'll work with a different map. We're going to come in, same idea. We're going to look at our mapping. The only difference with an outbound transaction is that the mapping here is flip-flop. The Transaction Manager field's on the left. The Business System field is on the right. The example here is, if I had a partner asking for a value that you didn't have in your system and you needed to read it from a table, how would you do that? Well, you would come in, again, this time this is a Kroger invoice. I'm seeing it exactly as I would see it in Transaction Manager. And my example is number of interpacks. So I could drag that over. If it already exists, you'll see it highlights it because it's already in my list. And then we can control the mapping. So here I'm saying I don't have a field coming from the system. So I want to read it from a lookup table, just like we did in the previous example. So in this scenario, I had created a lookup table called interpacks per item, and I simply mapped that in as the value. And if we look at the lookup table that I created, it's very similar to the one that we just did with the warehouse code, but reversed. In this case, I was taking the item code from the system. I was then going to look it up in my table, find the interpack quantity that you've entered in your lookup table, and then return that result, which is what we mapped into the field. So same idea, just reversing the process, but can really make it much more streamlined in your integration mapping and making sure that all of your data is getting populated.